Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out in this beautiful weather. We cannot ask you for more. We're going to pick up this peaceful protest at Westfield area against hate. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Yu Qiu, the president of the Westfield Area Chinese American Association, WACA. Today's event is organized by WACA. We represent Chinese members in Westfield and its neighboring towns. We were founded 6 years ago, aiming to promote community support and enrich cultural diversity. During these years, we have actively engaged with many passionate activities, such as volunteering 5K Pizza Run, Abby's Fest, and participating Multicultural Diversity Day. Furthermore, during the most difficult times of the pandemic last year, we donated more than 10,000 PPE to the frontline healthcare workers and also more than 3,000 to support our local small businesses. Thank you. We do this because we love our town. We want to make our community a better place to live for everyone. Today, however, we're here seeking your support to stop hate against Asian, and furthermore, stop hate against any race. Thank you. We need to say this firmly, loudly, and clearly. Hate is a crime. Prejudice is not acceptable in any shape or form, no matter it is against the Asian, or against the women, or against any particular group. We feel very sad about what happened in Atlanta, New York, in Oakland, and in San Francisco recently. And just when we were planning for this event, we heard similar hatred incidents happened in our own town. To our friends, in different formats and to different degrees. We were angry and horrified. But we shouldn't be, because we're all immigrants come to this country looking for freedom, including the freedom from fear. Today, we're here not just to mourn the lost lives and the hurt souls, but also we want to stop this hate crime in every way we can. First, let's have a moment of silence, remembering those lost lives and the hurt souls. Thank you. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Congressman Tom Malinowski come over share with us his perspective.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. It seems like not too long ago, I was standing right here with many of you at a Black Lives Matter rally. We were talking about the same thing that we are talking about today, and we'll do it as often as we need to keep our communities safe and secure from this kind of hatred. I want to thank everybody for coming out and joining. Members of the Westfield Council, Chief Battlero's here. Let's give a round of applause for the police department and law enforcement for keeping us safe today. And look, the reason why it's so important that all of us are here and all of you are here is because we need to assert loud and clear that when there is violence against Asian Americans, that is not an Asian American problem. When there's hatred against Asian Americans, that is not an Asian American problem. Any more than anti-Semitism is a Jewish problem, or racism against African Americans is an African American problem. No. This is an American problem. This is our problem. We all have an equal stake in making sure that it is solved, that it is heard from our community. I think all of us out here, we're here partly because we know that what has happened to members of our Asian American community was in a way predictable. I hate to say that, but it's true, because we know from human history, from human nature, that when people are feeling insecure, when people are losing their jobs, when people are facing something terrible like this virus, there is a natural and unfortunate human tendency to try to find somebody to blame, to try to find somebody to scapegoat. And that's why leadership is so important in moments like this, to remind us not to do that. You all remember after the horrible attacks of September 11, 2001, one of the first things that President Bush did was to go to a mosque to say to all of us that the enemy that hit us is not people who talk a certain way, come from a certain country, worship God a certain way. The enemy is terrorism. The enemy is evil. It's not Muslim people. It was an incredibly important thing for a president of the United States to do in that moment, because he knew there is this unfortunate temptation that people have. We need that kind of leadership today. We haven't always had it in the months that we have been suffering from this terrible coronavirus crisis. We know that. So we are here in part to compensate for that. We are here today to step up and to show that leadership. Now I'll tell you what Congress is going to do. We will very shortly pass the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act to deal with this head on. And what that bill does is very simple. It tells the United States Justice Department that it has to track hate crimes committed related to the COVID-19 crisis, because if you can't measure the problem, if you don't acknowledge it, you can't fix it. You can't address it. It tells the Justice Department to work with our local law enforcement and state level law enforcement to make sure that everybody is protected. And it asks them to put out guidelines on the language that we use, because we all know that the language that we use as leaders, as citizens, matters a great deal in moments like this. And we are here today, unfortunately, in part because some people use the wrong language. So that's what we're doing in the United States Congress. But there's something even more important that all of us need to do every single day when we are confronted by things like this. We need to step up and say clearly that a virus has no nationality. We are all Americans. We are all in this together. Whether our forebears or we ourselves come from Poland, like I do, or Ireland, or Italy, or South Africa, or Nigeria, or Japan, or China, or Korea, or the Philippines, or India, or Pakistan, we are all Americans. And you know what? There is nothing more American than choosing America. That's what all of our immigrant communities have done. They made a choice. They didn't have to, but they chose America. They chose the American way of life, American values, American principles, in part because they wanted to lead the kind of thing that we are here to protest today. And so we need to embrace that choice. We need to assert that we are better off because people make that choice, generation after generation after generation, wherever they may come from. And we know how diverse our community is here. People actually are still a little surprised when I tell them that in my congressional district, 1 in 5 people were born outside the United States. When I go speak to our high schools and to our middle schools, I sometimes ask the kids, raise your hand if at least one of your parents was born outside the United States. And in many of our schools, half the hands go up. So we know this instinctively in our community, that we are all in this together. That if somebody hates you, that hate is eventually going to come around and target me. If somebody scapegoats you, that scapegoat is eventually going to come around to me. I see a bunch of signs that say, hate is a virus. That's what we mean by that. Hate is a virus because once it starts, it doesn't respect any boundaries. It doesn't care who you are, what you look like, where you come from. We all come from somewhere. It will eventually come around to us. So we are here to say it is not going to start in our community. It's not going to start in Westfield. It's not going to start in Union County. It's not going to start in New Jersey. If we see the slightest sign here, we are going to stamp it up. Because we know we are better than that. We have a stake in all of us being better than that. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Congressman's very encouraging affirmation and promising actions. We have received very firm support from the mayor of the Westfield and her leadership teams from the very beginning of this. Now, let's welcome our Deputy Mayor of the Westfield, Linda Hapgood.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Congressman Malinowski, for all of those very important words today. I'm Linda Hapgood. I'm the Deputy Mayor of Westfield, and I'm also a councilwoman for Ward 1. The mayor sends her regards and is very sorry that she couldn't be here today with all of you. I'm so impressed to see how many people showed up today. The mayor isn't here today because it wasn't on her calendar. This shouldn't have been on any of our calendars. None of us should be here worrying about bigotry or hate or racism or prejudice. Westfield is not about that, and we can see across this park today how many of you believe that. Yesterday, the mayor put out a press release reiterating the no tolerance policy that Westfield has for any kind of racism, and we will continue to fight that battle even though none of us thinks that in the year 2021 it should even be part of the conversation. The Brindle administration has been very much about bringing people together, about unifying, about not seeing divides, about reaching across the aisle, about reaching across the table. We've started organizations around town and invited across the internet for as far as anyone could see. We've invited people to be part of the efforts that we're making in town to involve people. Hundreds and hundreds of volunteers now are involved in things that we've started. And the ones worth mentioning today at a rally like this involve our Human Relations Advisory Council. It's trying to bring people together and to point out all of the things that we should be leaving behind us. Our Westfield Mental Health Council. I wore today my cake mask. The Westfield Mental Health Council is starting a campaign reiterating Westfield's stigma-free attitude, embracing all of the things that we would like to see in the community: compassion, acceptance, kindness, and empathy. Those are the kinds of things that we would like at a local level to be emphasizing every day. Because it starts local, it starts in our backyards, it starts in our living rooms, it starts at our town council meetings, it starts at the schools, it starts at church, it starts in the synagogues. It needs to be everywhere, and when you see these things that are not consistent with what we believe, you need to call them out. And so in closing today, I wanted to just share with you something that I've found inspiring and has gotten me through a lot of these very trying times as we continue to see hatred and racism penetrating our cultures and our communities. I pulled out a couple of stanzas from Amanda Gorman's poem, the one that she gave at President Biden's inauguration. I cannot do this poem justice in its delivery, but I at least wanted to share the words with you today because they're important for us to remember. The poem is called The Hill We Climb. We are striving to forge a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation and every corner called our country. Our people diverse and beautiful will emerge, battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. A new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. Thank you very much.
Action is always louder. We have a very big hill to climb, but we are all determined we'll get there. Educating our children against biased prejudice is far more important than ever. Now, let's welcome Vice President from the Westfield Board of Education, Mr. Brendan Galligan.
Good afternoon. My name is Brendan Galligan, and I'm the Vice President of the Westfield Board of Education. I stand here today on behalf of my fellow board members to join with the Westfield Area Chinese American Association, Mayor Brindle and the Town Council, Chief Bataloro, Congressman Malinowski, and all citizens of Westfield as we unite against hate. These acts of violence and hatred against Asian Americans are disturbing, abhorrent, and absolutely unacceptable. As a board, we work closely with Dr. Dolan, our superintendent of schools, and her team of administrators in the Westfield Public Schools, who provide classroom lessons and school activities to combat bias and bullying, and to encourage students to speak out against prejudice and discrimination. Our No Place for Hate committees at the intermediate and high schools, along with developmentally appropriate lessons about race and cultural diversity in all grades, are just two examples of the district's ongoing efforts. Throughout the school year, our teachers and principals reinforce the message that hateful acts of any kind, for any reason, against anyone will not be tolerated. The school district has worked hard to put in place culturally responsive teaching strategies to create a respectful community of learners. We know that our work is not done. However, the Board of Education and the Westfield Public School District remain committed to fighting acts of hate and to encourage our students to be upstanders, not bystanders. Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this important event.
Further along, the PTC, Westfield Parent-Teach Council, also want to deliver their statements to show their support, even though they couldn't come here with us today. So I'm going to read their statements. The Westfield Parent-Teach Council is founded on the principle of community. We firmly believe that when community comes together, we can achieve a better world for our children. We therefore also believe that when any portion of our community is hurt, we are all hurt. Today, we're hurting. The Westfield PTC condemns all forms of anti-Asian American and the Pacific Islanders hate and stands for solidarity with our Asian Americans and the Pacific Islander students and families. We extend our condolences To the family of the victims of the Atlanta shooting. They were mothers and daughters just like us, and now the love and the laughter that filled with the families is replaced by massive void. While these acts of the violence and hatred are not new, we must move forward to create a more compassionate and inclusive society. Our nation's history is full of difficult times, and scapegoating specific communities has been a response way too often. It is important in these difficult times for us all band together as one community, indivisible. We cannot turn on each other and blame innocent Americans even though they look different than us. We must speak up when we see any acts of hatred and bigotries and commit as a community to respect and value each of our members. Together, we can prove that love always trumps hate. Thank you. For some of us who celebrate Passover starting today, we have also invited our religious leader to share with us how we make this celebration more meaningful. Now, let's welcome Rabbi from Temple Emmanuel of the Westfield, Rabbi Appel.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. This evening, Jews around the world will begin the week-long observance of Passover. The highlight is the Seder, a meal filled with songs and stories, rituals and symbols. We recall our days as slaves in Egypt, our miraculous redemption through the parted waters, and our journey to freedom. More than just recall, we are supposed to reenact. Why? Because we are called on to remember our own struggles, so that we will always know what is in the heart of the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, so that we will always care for them, to offer refuge should they need, to be their voice if they cannot be heard. And so, Jews throughout the United States, and certainly here, have joined in solidarity with our Asian brothers and sisters, some of whom are Jewish too. We stand by your side, and we will not be silent. The surge in hate crimes against Asian Americans since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic is a shameful stain on our nation. The rising numbers make clear that the prejudice and violence that Asian Americans face is real, and it is only getting worse. These horrific attacks do not occur in a vacuum. They spring from the same climate of xenophobia, bigotry, and white supremacy that led to hate-fueled killings around the United States. The attacks in Atlanta, which claimed the lives of 8 people, 7 of them women and 6 Asian Americans, threaten the core values of our society. As Jews of many backgrounds, we have felt similar pain throughout our own historical experiences. Jews were senselessly blamed for the bubonic plague in medieval Europe, and similar tropes are still perpetuated today, leading to anti-Semitic violence and persecution. So we stand in solidarity with the Asian American community in the face of bigotry and violence. We call on all elected officials to forcefully denounce these hate crimes and to provide resources to appropriately respond to this surge in violence. This includes Congress passing the No Hate Act to strengthen hate crime reporting and response. As we tackle the dual crises of COVID-19 and racial inequity, we must work to ensure accountability for hate crimes and justice for Asian American communities. We must come to a better understanding of our own biases and false belief systems, and put an end to the culture of xenophobia that fosters hateful actions. It is not just that we must call for an end to prejudice and attacks against Asian and Asian Americans, but we must celebrate Asian joy. We must uplift Asian artists. We must support Asian businesses. We must protect Asian communities. And we must recognize Asian accomplishments. As Jews, we understand that we cannot be innocent bystanders. In such times, silence is more than complacency. It is complicity. We must not be silent. We must not be complacent. We must not be complicit. American Jews will stand with our Asian American neighbors just as we have done in the past. If one of us is afraid, then all of us should be afraid. If one of us is unsafe, all of us are unsafe. Thank you.
Well said. Shalom. We also gratefully invited our religious leader from Presbyterian Church in the Westfield to share their remarks. Now let's welcome Senior Pastor Jeremy Jenkins.
So friends, over the last 2 weeks or so, there's been a little piece of scripture that's almost been like an earworm in my head. I have not been able to get it out of my head. I want to share it with you now. There is no longer Jew nor Greek. There is no longer slave or free. There is no longer male or female. Now, it's always really dangerous to take a piece of scripture out of its context. So I'd like to share it with you now. These words were written to a series of small churches in what is now Turkey about 2,000 years ago. These words were written for a community that was multicultural. These words were written for a church community that was struggling with who it was and who could be in and who could be out. These words were written because people were struggling with how to live together. There is no longer Jew nor Greek. There is no longer slave nor free. There is no longer male nor female, these words said. Now these are holy scripture for me and for millions and millions of Christians around the world. It is a focus on the one whom we follow, who we believe draws all of humanity together. Now I know that there are a lot of people here in this crowd who do not follow my creed and religion. That is okay. What I am hoping to get to is for you to understand a little bit of where I come from with this. Personally, for me, it is a reminder that goes beyond a religious community. It is a reminder that our shared humanity is what makes each of your lives sacred for me right now. In the faith in which I am grounded, each one of us are God's beloved. Every color, every ethnicity is a thread woven into the fabric of our community. And this is sacred. It is worth protecting, and it is why I stand before you here today. There is no longer Jew nor Greek, these words said. There is no longer slave nor free, these words said. There is no longer male nor female. Our distinctions are part of what makes our country so beautiful. It is our distinctions that make us special in this world. However, as our representative said just a few moments ago, too often we allow for fear to turn distinction into a perceived threat. Across our country right now, dangerous rhetoric is driving people to fear and to hate Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Long-held tropes and racist imagery is showing up in common discourse. Our neighbors are being taunted, threatened, hurt, and as we saw in the suburbs of Atlanta, murdered. Now in just a moment, the Reverend Allison Phillip will come forward to start to point us in the direction of things we can do in a more practical way to combat racism. I share these words with you today only as a call to our common humanity together, and I hope that they will reside with you as we leave this place. There is no longer Jew nor Greek. There is no longer slave nor free. There is no longer male nor female. Thank you, my friends.
Mind-side alignment is always fundamental in everything we do. Thanks, Pastor Jenkins, for your remarks. And now let's hear what another religious leader to share with us from the practical standpoint. Now let's welcome Senior Pastor from the First United Methodist Church of the Westfield, Allison Phillip.
On Monday evening, Temple Emmanuel, where Rabbi Appel serves, hosted Brian Stevenson, who is a lawyer who works on criminal justice reform in the Atlanta area, and he wrote a book called Just Mercy that was made into a Netflix special back, I believe, in the summer, so you may have heard of it. Stevenson shared some calls to action that spoke deeply to me and that speak to this occasion too, and so I want to share some of his words in the hope that they might be like seeds that are planted in us that grow up and bear fruit. He spoke deeply to what is needed in the face of racism of all kinds, of hate of all kinds. All of those, hate is connected, it's a virus, and it shows up in all kinds of different ways at different times. And his words speak to this time as well. One of the things is he called us to be part of changing narratives. To be part of changing narratives around us. There's so many narratives that are rooted in fear. Often the stories we hear on the news, the political debates that we might be part of or hear, tensions between people. Often underneath there is this thread of fear. And yet all of us long for hope and for dignity and for respect. So how do we move to a narrative that lifts up hope and dignity and respect in the face of fear? One thing we can do is by treating people with dignity and respect every chance we get, by teaching our children to treat people with dignity and respect every chance that they get, by demanding it in the places that we study and work and live. And that's something we do together. We commit to learn and humbly invite others to learn with us, to hear from other experiences and voices and perspectives. And a third part of changing the narrative is holding on to hope. Stevenson called us to be sustained by hope. In fact, he said that the enemy of justice is hopelessness. Because hopelessness can get inside of us and stop us from thinking that we can make change, or stop us from thinking that we can make peace, that we can be part of that. Hopelessness can make us complacent. And so he urges us to look for hope in every place that we can find it, and to share it with others as part of building a new consciousness, as part of building a better world for ourselves and for our children. And friends, I think that that is part of what we are doing here today by standing out here together. We are holding a protest. We are gathering together to say what we don't stand for and what we do stand for. And our solidarity is an act of hope. It's a way we witness to hope. It's a way that we recognize, as many of the other speakers have said, that when one of us hurts, all of us hurt. Standing in solidarity means recognizing that we are connected to each other in all of our differences as one human family. I had thought about sharing some practical steps for how we stand in solidarity. And there is a great website that has some ideas. It's called stopaapihate.org. I'm going to share the takeaway that my biggest takeaway from that website when I read it, which is standing up and standing with someone. When we see somebody experiencing hate, or whether that's verbal or physical, whatever it looks like, by looking that person in the eye, by standing next to them, by walking with them, that is a powerful act of solidarity and hope in the face of hatred, and it changes the narrative. You can read some more of practical things you can do by looking at that website. But I want to encourage you to know that standing together as we are today, as you do in the different ways you do in your workplace and school and place of worship, that standing with people is an act of hope that spreads, that creates a different narrative. We have a power and a responsibility to do that. And it's something that we do together. I'm grateful to see so many faces here, to see this great act of hope among us.
Thank you very much. Indeed, all the supporters here today, all the guest speakers here today, definitely is a good, very good affirmations to show that we're not here alone in the fight. We are together as a solidarity. Now, great suggestions from Pastor Philip. Let's also further to hear what is the combined resources there available in action for us. Now let's welcome our Chief Police Officer of the Westfield, Chris Pettilora.
Good afternoon. It wasn't but a few months ago that I stood here in solidarity with many other Westfield residents to make it clear that Black lives matter. And once again, here I stand with you, not only in solidarity and support that Asian lives matter, but to mourn with you and to decry the very deep history of Asian Pacific Islander hate that has occurred in the roots of American history. As your police chief, I am here to acknowledge this is a moment of reckoning, and unfortunately, not a new moment in American history. I denounce the violence and discrimination and rhetoric that has attacked our Asian American Pacific Islander community. I am here to stand with our API community of neighbors as we all stand up against violence and hate. We are here to protect you. We see you. We stand with you. I am here to pledge continued education for our Westfield Police Department so that we may continue to develop strong, culturally aware officers with a deep understanding of the rich history and culture of all of our residents, that we may continue to make it clear that a community is not one story, but many stories. Our department, now more than ever, is focused on being not on the outside of the community, but being of the community. This is a moment in history when we are all being called into account. Those of us in law enforcement recognize the humanity of this moment, and we mourn with you the need for gatherings like today. But we take this with full responsibility, that we are here to stand up against violence and hate against our API neighbors. We see you, we hear you, and we are here to protect you every day. Thank you.
We also have a new committee formed last year to help us in this kind of support. So now let's welcome Chairman from the Human Relations Advisory Committee, Dr. Alexis Jamal.
Thank you, WACA, for organizing this peaceful protest to condemn hate, racism, and anti-Asian violence here in Westfield and elsewhere across the country. I am Alexis Jamal, the chairperson of the Human Relations Advisory Commission, or HRAC, established with Mayor Brindle's support via town ordinance in February 2020. Along with me is Varsha Iyer, also an HRAC commissioner. There are 11 of us. HRAC's mission is to serve as a resource and community partner to uproot, dismantle, and eradicate hate, prejudice, racism, and to foster an inclusive and supportive environment, raise awareness, and build a community that appreciates our commonalities and celebrates our diversity. A quick story. Last night, I was on a Zoom call, and I mentioned that I would be attending a protest today. And one person said, "Be careful." Her words echoed in my mind and reminded me that as a Black woman, I live in fear, and I live my life despite the fear that I have that I can be harmed emotionally, physically, or psychologically at any time and in any place, including schools, supermarkets, nail salons, my own home. That is terrorizing. Never knowing when an attack is going to come. So you always must be prepared, always hyper-vigilant, always on guard. As I was spiraling into the fear and feelings of being powerless, I remembered that I'm not alone. This protest is about banding together, filling in the gaps by having each other's back, so hate has no place to hide. What does that look like? That means when someone says to you, "They're taking all of our jobs," or "Please don't bring that low-income housing to Westfield," or "It's their fault," fill in the blank. What's your response? Because we all know the coded language of bigotry and bias and hate. So when hate visits our dinner table, do we invite it for seconds to make things not be uncomfortable or to not be rude? When hate whispers a racist, anti-Semitic, or anti-Black, or anti-Latinx, or classist, heterosexist, transphobic joke in our ears, do we laugh? Do we play along? We all have a role to play to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. We are responsible for doing our part in creating an environment where acts of hate are not allowed to happen. Because what we permit, we promote. Silence is complicity. We must collaborate to change minds. Awareness is an important step toward action that eradicates hate. And we could only change what we're willing to face. And most importantly, we need to work together to change people's hearts. That's where the real work of eradicating hate begins and ends. So please remember, it's not only about them, those who think and do hateful things, but it's also about us, examining our thinking and actions. Because we who believe that no one should live in fear or despite fear, we have power, and we also have work to do in ourselves, in our families, and in our friendship groups. HRAC is here to help us do that work. We've got your back. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the great suggestion. Yes, hate has no home here, and we have to change. The change starts from us. Thanks for all the great remarks right now, and to emphasizing hate absolutely has no home here. We'll continue with our speeches from the residents after a short music break. Now let's welcome the duet, The Prayer. This song teaches us the truth. Let each soul find another soul to love. Let's have a faith in each other so we can all be safe.
I pray you'll be alright. 后的银行when stars go out each night remembers where you are. Let this be our prayer when shadows fill our day. Lead us to a place, guide us with your grace, give us faith so we'll be saved. We ask life to be kind,
We ask that life be kind
watch us from above.
and watch us from above.
We hope each soul will
We
find
hope each soul will find
another soul to love.
another soul to love.
Let this be our prayer,
Let us be our
just
prayer,
like every child.
just like every child.
沿途泛着白，guide us with your